Welcome to the Let Them Live podcast with Emily Burning, a place for meaningful conversations, real stories, and a shared mission to protect life.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again for another episode of the Let Them Live podcast. Today we have Monica Snyder, and she's with Secular Pro Life, and she's going to talk a lot from a very different perspective than we've had on this podcast. But I think it's very important to understand that we have linked arms with many different types of people in this movement against abortion. So, welcome, Monica. I'm very happy to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we talk about your work and we talk about secular pro life, first, I'd love for you to share your story. Many people assume that the pro life movement is driven entirely by kind of religious convictions, which a majority of it is, but your journey is different. So, can you talk about how you came to hold a pro life view as a secular and just kind of share your journey?
Sure. I have always been pro-life as long as I've had an opinion. Um, my parents were still are very anti-abortion, and in particular, they talked about it when we were kids, but in particular, there was a situation when I was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 or 9 years old, I'm not sure, where my dad went to the abortion clinic in our town. We lived in California, and my parents were friends with the sidewalk counselor who was there, and when he went to see kind of what was going on, the sidewalk counselor, was talking to a woman who wanted to get an abortion because she had nowhere to live, and my dad called my mom and said, "Hey, what would you think about if we let her stay with us for a while?" And my mom said, "If you're fine with it, I'm fine with it." And so she lived with us for, like, the second half of her pregnancy and for several months after she had her baby. She was working on some kind of apprenticeship at the time, so she ended up moving out and getting her own place after that. And at the time that that happened, as a kid, I didn't think, "Wow, this is so crazy," "This is such an unusual situation." I thought whatever your parents do is normal, so I thought, "Wow, this is what you do. This is a very serious thing, and you do a lot to try to make it so that this is not happening."
Mhm.
And I say that as the preeminent example, but it wasn't the only one. My parents were pretty upfront about what they thought about it. So I was raised that way. And I was raised Catholic, and in high school, I started to have some pretty serious doubts that ultimately, um, I went with. Yeah, it was probably about 10 years going from Catholicism to full-blown atheism with a lot of steps on the way. And as I deconverted, my positions on a lot of things changed, especially related to gender roles and sexuality compared to what I was raised with and what I ultimately decided made sense to me. It changed a lot. But one position that never changed was on abortion, because abortion is killing a human being, and there are lots of factors to this debate. It can be a complicated debate, but that factor is enormous, and I do think that for most people, once you acknowledge that, it's pretty difficult to let that go, and
Yeah.
that has nothing to do with your religious views. And so what changed for me wasn't becoming pro-life, because I
Mhm.
was already, like, morally opposed to abortion. What changed for me was finding a way to do anything about it,
Mm.
especially as a secular person, because by the time I was in my early 20s, I was, fully secular, and I've been atheist for a long time, and I do feel strongly about this issue. But what really changed for me was the rise of social media, because I joined Facebook not very long after it came into existence, and through that process, first of all, discovered what it means to argue online in the modern day.
Yeah.
And, there's lots of ways that is terrible, but there are some ways where it is useful, and
Mm.
most people, I find, I shouldn't say most people. There's a lot of people where it's easier to argue with strangers online than to talk to the people in your actual life who you have relationships with.
Sure.
There's no, risk socially. If a bunch of strangers online are mad at you or don't like an opinion you have, not really anything happens to you. And so it gives all of us a chance to kind of test out what we really think in a low social risk situation. That was very helpful to me. I had never really argued about it before. I'd never really heard
Mm.
a pro-choice perspective before. I'd never
Yeah.
really engaged the issue, and I started arguing online a lot with kind of the same couple dozen people. And first of all, it helped me see which arguments I had that made sense and which I was like, I need to think about that again. And it helped me understand how people can be pro-choice and I can like them and be friends with them, and we just hold very different positions. But most importantly, through that, I met a woman named Kelsey Hazard, and a year or 2 after we met online, she reached out to me and said, "I feel like there should be an organization or a place for people against abortion who aren't religious." And she knew I was not religious, and she asked me if I wanted to help, and I said, "Sure." I started off with just a Facebook page, very low maintenance, nothing. I was already arguing on Facebook all the time, now it's just in this specific location,
Yeah.
uh, and it grew slowly and iteratively over years. It was not a 501(c)(3) for the first 8 or 9 years, it was just something it was just a blog and a place for people to talk, but
Mhm.
Kelsey and we weren't the only ones, there were others in and out throughout the years that helped a lot,
Mhm.
some who are still with us. But I think we were constantly a little bit surprised at how much people were looking for this. We started getting asked to speak at events, we started getting asked to do presentations, and most movingly to me, we regularly had people reach out to us who are atheists or agnostics and just say, "Wow, I really thought I was literally the only one."
Mm.
And through that, we started to find more of them, and then it expanded from there, not just our mission used to say we have a three-part mission, and the second part used to say our mission was to make space for secular people to do anti-abortion work, and we changed it a few years ago, and now it says make space for non-traditional pro-lifers to
Mm.
do anti-abortion work because we wanted to include, um, religious people who are non-traditional in other ways, like they're really left-leaning or they're Democrats or they're LGBT or they're in a lot of cases, if they are
Mm.
Black or Hispanic or something else, and there are different ways this slices where even though
Mm.
we are just focused on making secular arguments, because we're a single issue group and because we try to be very nonpartisan and nonsectarian and just focus on this issue, we have found over the years that in addition to the atheists and agnostics, we also have other people who in different ways didn't feel like they could plug in to the larger movement, feel like they can kind of come sit with us. And so we expanded our second part of our definition to just be all encompassing. Um,
Mm.
the third part of our definition is coalition building. So if you are the
Mm.
most conservative, most devout Catholic person who wants to work with us, we wanna work with you too. But we do feel like there are a lot of places in the movement for political conservatives and devout Christians to plug in, and there are far fewer places for kind of everybody else. So we try to make a little more room that way. Anyway, yeah,
Yeah, you
so
guys are
how we got started
no, I
was
love it.
social media.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that. No, it's like you provide this watering hole for everyone who's non-traditional, and I think it's very important. I think it's important with the coalition building as well. I know that there's a lot of people in the pro-life movement that are like, "Why are you associating with atheists?" And I'm like, because we all agree on something very core. We agree that life begins at conception, and taking of that life is wrong. Like
And
like that's
because
a very
everyone anyone can be against abortion, and everyone
yeah.
should be against abortion, and that's way more important to me than if you and I agree on God or Donald Trump or whatever. I don't
Right.
care.
It's a very primary issue, and so that's why I'm loving having you on. And something, I mean, if you guys aren't already following Monica and secular pro-life, you definitely should because I think that for me, you guys are equipping me with how to talk about abortion. Even, however many years I've been in this movement, it's
Mm.
always important to know what you're talking about to understand the arguments behind it. And so I kind of want to dig into that a little bit, your background in biology, forensic science, and some of the just in all the time that you've been on social media and you've seen everything under the sun, some of the most common misunderstandings that you see about fetal development and the science surrounding the life issue.
Sure. So, in terms of the biology, I think the most common misunderstanding I see is people not knowing the difference between gametes and organisms, so sperm and eggs versus a zygote. There are a lot of arguments that pro-choice people make that really just are telling me that they don't know where that paradigm shift is. It'd be one thing to say, "I see a shift and I don't think it's important and I don't care." Sure, we can argue about that. But for them to tell us that we must think every sperm is sacred is them just saying, "We have no idea what you think. We don't know what you're talking about."
Oh, yeah.
So I see a lot of that where, and it's not I wanna be clear too, it's not just the most obnoxious, hardcore pro-abortion trolls on the internet that have misperceptions or confusions, it's a ton of people. It's a pro-life people too.
Yeah.
I had a conversation, not long ago with some friends who are what I would call nominally pro-life. They're against abortion, it gives them bad vibes, they haven't really engaged the issue, and one
It's
of
a
them
bad
said, like
vibes. I love
yeah.
it. Like,
And
that's
one of
so
them said something like, "It's just too bad we can't just scientifically say once and for all when life starts." And I was like,
I can.
"I have good news." But that was a pro-life person, that wasn't someone trying to argue with me. And I
Right.
don't blame people for this. You can ask me about a lot of topics that we probably covered at some point in high school that I don't remember now, and
Mhm.
if people learn about fetal development in their normal education at all, which is an if, there's no
Mm,
particular reason usually when they're learning about it for it to be salient to their lives and for them to remember it. So,
yeah.
no, mourning the loss of education isn't the issue here. It's
Yeah.
reasonable for people to not know a lot about this, and then there's active attempts at significant biased information because of the abortion debate about this stuff. So I would say the most common one is people not knowing the difference between gametes and organisms. With sperm and egg, you have haploid cells, means half of our DNA. And when they combine, it's a diploid cell. You go from one kind of reproduction, which is meiosis, to mitosis. Like in terms of biology, it's a paradigm shift. It's a very clear delineation. You don't have to care. You don't have to
Yeah.
care. That's an ethical, philosophical conversation about whether you even care about that. But in terms of
Mm,
biology, it's not a confusing thing. You can see this when you look at science communicators that aren't part of the abortion debate, just teaching people about reproduction. And they'll very casually and comfortably talk about how we begin as a single cell. We begin as a single cell. You see it at the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry had a whole thing about it when I went on my honeymoon to Chicago. And I remember thinking, like, see, this isn't hard. See, it's not hard.
it's
It's
not
not
hard.
hard.
Hard, and I
Um,
tend to my degree's in biology, so I tend to think the way that
mm,
you think. I tend to just be science-minded and think, "Well, how can people not understand this?" But you're right, there is a genuine lack of knowledge, and I have had that argument, "Well, the sperm cells." I'm like, "No, no, no, they're we're talking about 2 very different things here."
Genuinely don't care about that at all. People are like, "Well, what will happen if and describe different ways that sperm will die." I'm like, "I can't tell you how
I
much I
I don't
don't
care
care
about
at
yeah,
all
I
about
don't care
that."
about sperm, I don't care about eggs, I care
Yeah.
about when there's a new human being, so, it's
Mhm.
important to remember, I think, again, I try to be patient with people, but it is a little bit difficult when the science is very simple and it's very straightforward and it's just not debatable, so,
The
I
the
think
other
that
category I do wanna bring up, this
yeah.
wasn't a thing pre-2019, I remember when this shifted, is, embryonic heartbeats.
Oh, yeah.
So, pre-2019, roughly, that wasn't a huge part of the debate, as I recall, and then the pro-life side started introducing heartbeat legislation, and then the
Mhm.
pro-choice side started by responding that we're oversimplifying things because it's not really a heart and it's not really a heartbeat.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
remember when it happened and I was thinking, "You guys are bold to go that strategy," because independent of the abortion debate, millions of parents have gone to the first prenatal appointment where their medical professional team has talked to them about their child's heartbeat, but you're gonna try to, like, retcon all that? Like, what's the strategy
Yeah.
here? And then
Yeah.
and then we've seen it took a little while, it wasn't immediate, but we've seen, like, Planned Parenthood change its website about whether it uses those phrases, even as far as some pregnancy apps change their language from, "This is when the heartbeat starts," to "cardiac activity," whatever.
Cardiac
And
activity. Yeah.
the thing is, there's always 2 layers to the biology conversations. There's the actual facts of what we can scientifically describe, and then there's what we think they mean to us in terms of ethics, in terms of social construct. That's fine. That's fine. Um, but I've had pro-lifers push back on me with this when I make a big deal about there is in fact a heart that is in fact beating, and they're like, "But it was a valuable human life before it had a heart anyway, and that's not important." I'm like, "It's not important to you, but it is important to a lot of people." We have recurrently heard the story of people who were pro-choice until that first prenatal appointment where someone talked to them about the heartbeat. I actually, because this argument was such a thing in 1920, 21, I actually collected for our blog testimonies of people talking about how they used to be pro-choice and became pro-life, and there's often multiple factors. It's not usually just a sudden
Sure.
thing. But I collected the ones of the number of people who believed literally that abortion was destroying a clump of cells like a sphere, like a blastocyst. And
Mm.
then through different information, either through their own pregnancy experiences or other or taking a biology class or something else, when they learned how early development starts, they felt lied to and it was morally relevant to them and it started them or sometimes quickly moved them more into the pro-life camp. And these are not people who had abortions before where they have some sort of, psychological motivation to not listen to this stuff. These are people who just they were pro-choice
Mhm.
and then they got this new information like, "Excuse me, what?" And I'm not saying everybody. There are plenty of people who understand fetal development and are pro-choice, plenty. But I am saying it
Yeah.
matters to people, and if it matters to people, I think they have a right to know the information. And
Yes.
so the whole "when does an organism begin" is relevant in a very philosophical way, but m almost no one is getting an abortion because there's a zygote in them. It's gotten further than that if they have a confirmed pregnancy test. They're already further than that. We could talk about the development level at typical, when you typically get an abortion, but, um so the zygote thing is interesting from a philosophical perspective, but I think the heartbeat thing is interesting from a very practical perspective. People who've had pregnancy loss, people who've gone to that appointment where they said, "Sorry, there is no heartbeat," have an inverted way of also thinking about how, "Wow, that actually was a big deal.
Yeah. I
That
think
actually
that's
was a big deal to
very,
me."
very good
So
point that you bring up and how we change our perspective based on the circumstances of certain situations. You wouldn't tell a woman like, "Oh, yeah, you miscarried some cells." You wouldn't do that in the same language as then used for abortion, and so there's
uh
definitely some dehumanizing there, which is very interesting. Um, and I kinda wanna talk a little bit about this because we talk about the biology of it, but there is, like, the personhood argument. A lot of
Mhm,
people could say, "Yeah, okay, life begins at conception, but it doesn't matter because they aren't granted personhood." And then I do think
mhm.
that that does get into for me at least, again, being a Christian, it would kind of get into that realm of Christianity and our purpose and the larger purpose. But as a secular voice within a predominantly Christian movement, how do you start to respond to personhood and some of those deeper philosophical questions that aren't as
This could be the entire
I
episode.
know it kind of
I, um okay, let me think. So first I want to say that on a philosophical level or on like a theoretical educational level, when we're talking about rationality, I think fetal personhood is everything in the abortion debate. Everything. I think that the strong majority of people who say it doesn't matter if the fetus is a person because no one can use your body against your will, they don't really mean it because as soon as they feel like the fetus is a baby, they think abortion should be restricted. What they really mean is, I don't think the fetus is a person, so I don't care about this, which is a different claim. I think it turns on fetal personhood for almost everyone somewhere in the background deep down. I'm not saying it's the only factor. I'm just saying it's a huge one.
Mhm.
So it's a very important question. That said, I don't think it has to have as much to do with Christianity as pro-life Christians seem to think, because I think it's clear regardless of whether people are Christians or secular or Muslim or whatever they are, the overwhelming majority of people start with a baseline instinctive reaction that humans are valuable and important. It's not close. I find that pro-life Christians tend to want to know why atheists would value humans at all,
Mhm.
absent, the Imago Dei,
Yep.
absent,
Mhm.
God saying we're important or different things like that. And that's an okay thing to wonder and talk about, but that doesn't have much to do with the abortion debate because the bottom
right.
line is they do. You can see this even in pro-choice arguments. Clearly, pro-choice people care enormously about human rights because they make human rights-based arguments for abortion, the right to control your body, the
Mhm.
right to not have someone else use your body against your will, the rights of people to the I don't know if they'll say it as rights, but concerns about gender equality. All these things are concerns about the rights of groups of people. They're not just nihilism, we don't care and we want to live however we want and therefore let's do abortion. Like some people make that argument, but
Yeah.
most of them are trolling and they're rare anyway. Most people who are fighting for abortion rights are making human rights-based arguments, and secular people tend to care a lot, or even outside of that, you look at the way people talk about the rights of LGBT people, the rights of immigrants, the rights of all like, they immediately care about rights as a baseline position. So
Mm,
coming at this asking, like, outside of, a Christian worldview, why would you care about rights? That's a nice coffee shop philosophy conversation. You don't need it for the abortion debate. They
true.
already do. What you need is, when do you think a human gets rights and why? That's the personhood
Oh.
debate.
Uh-huh.
That's what it is. And so at Secular Pro-Life, when people talk to us about, when is a fetus a person, it's mostly just a question of asking them a lot of questions, getting them to think more about their criteria, and then trying to figure out if they can apply it consistently. And I will say, and this is not specific to pro-choice people, and it's not specific to secular people. I think people in general have thought very, very little about this within or outside the abortion rate. This isn't the way most people think day to day. And so they're going to start off with sort of a vibe, an instinctive reaction to, if I show you this range of fetal development, you can point to when you start to feel like it's a baby.
Mhm.
Any child could do this. Pro-lifers like to say, children know it's a baby. If you show them a 6-week embryo, do they know it's a baby? Like, come on. You could see humans will have a reaction the more it looks like a baby, the more they have the instinct, core instinct. Let's not hurt that thing,
Mhm.
core instinct. And so you're gonna have the problem of, depending on who you're talking to, you're gonna have the problem of people who really wanna make sure that abortion is okay and is protected, and then they work backwards from that conclusion to what we're talking about. And so the name of the game is to make them not feel defensive, make them feel like there's lots of time to think about this, make them feel like it's okay to talk to you about this and you guys don't have to agree. You wanna be really turning down the pressure on these conversations and making them like two people
Which
thinking
is
through a complicated
so
things together.
hard to do. It can be
Mhm,
very difficult because this is
mhm,
obviously a very polarizing thing, and we all feel very passionately about this, and it's life and death.
mhm.
I
Yep,
have to reemphasize that for anyone listening or watching, like, turn down the heat on the conversation. Don't
yeah,
go into a debate or a conversation expecting that you are going to change that person's mind. Just literally share your information, keep it calm, keep it cool, keep it chill.
yeah.
Plant those seeds, and that's
I
gonna
wouldn't even go into it, so let me, okay.
yeah.
It depends on what's going on, but in an interpersonal conversation, especially with someone you have a relationship with of any type, which is the
Mhm.
best place you can have these conversations because it's where you have the most influence, you don't even go into it thinking, "How can I change their mind?" You go into it thinking, "How can I make them feel comfortable talking about this?" How can we get to a point where we can share ideas in a low pressure situation? How can we get to the point where I can describe their view in a way that they're like, "Yes, that's my view," and then they know I'm listening, they know I'm not agreeing with their view, but I correctly understand it, and setting those standards of listening, of openness, of respectfulness. Not everybody, but a lot of people reciprocate that, and then
Mhm.
they're more open, and then there's, like, more of a information exchange happening. Now this is all getting into relational stuff as opposed to the actual content of your arguments. I would argue that the relational stuff is actually way more important. A lot of
Mm.
people change their minds. I have had pro-choice friends change their minds without me ever directly arguing with them about the issue at all. I
Wow.
think for a lot of people, half of it is just realizing that they are friends with, like, and get along with someone who's against abortion, and that almost, like, gives them permission to consider the possibility that they could think about this and not be damned as a bad person for
Yeah.
daring to not be pro-choice, okay? At least in the circles I run in. Um, and so pro-lifers, the pro-life movement does a really good job of apologetics and, like, if they say this, you could say that, and if they said to think about it this way, and that's important, and it's a really good baseline education that, frankly, I don't
Mm.
think the pro-choice movement has really done. The pro-choice movement, especially pre-Dobbs, I think they were riding a lot more on, "It's legal, get over it," and "The culture agrees with us," and maybe I would have done the same thing in their given position, I don't know. But then Dobbs happened, and they're still having this divergence of, "This isn't up for debate." Sis, it is. It actually is, and we are debating it. So they're still got this whiplash of even deciding if they want to engage these conversations. That's to our advantage. And we do this shelf right here, that shelf,
Yeah.
literally just books from different pro-lifers about how to answer these questions. People keep giving them to me at conferences. I got everybody. Okay. Pro-life movement does a great job of being like, we have engaged this conversation. We've
Yeah.
thought
Yeah.
about it a lot and we are willing to discuss it. And I love that about us. I
Yeah.
do think we could up our game on the relational part.
Yes.
there's different rules for arguing online versus in person, for arguing with people you know versus people you don't, and there's, like, different ways you can do all this, but the best thing you can do is engage in conversation with the people you actually have relationships with in
Yes.
real life over time. And there, what you do wanna do eventually, ultimately, is steer it towards the personhood conversation. I really think everything turns there.
Yeah, I
But just letting people know that it's okay to talk about, that their stories of why they feel this way are important, that you want them to feel open to talking, that's already powerful. Anyway, cycling back to the personhood conversation, I would just keep asking questions, "When do you think this entity becomes a person and why? Tell me more about that," and let it be even a series of conversations, and then just push back with where you're skeptical or why. I think the most persuasive pro-choice personhood argument is gonna be about cognitive ability.
Mm,
When they say, "Oh, personhood doesn't begin till birth," that's silly.
yeah,
Almost
that was
nobody believes that.
literally my next question is, like, what's the strongest argument in favor of abortion do you think exists?
In terms of there's 2 strong arguments for abortion in my opinion, and one
Yeah.
of them is the personhood cognitive ability conversation, and
Mm.
the other one is bodily rights. Those are the 2, like, if I was gonna be pro-choice, those would be it. So, for the personhood conversation, and I say cognitive, it covers a lot of things. Some people will say consciousness, sentience, cortical connections, whatever. They'll pick something along our neural development
Mm,
and say, "That is the magic thing right there. After that, it's not okay." And some of them will have thought about it a lot. Most of them won't have.
mm,
Most of them will be repeating something they heard somewhere. Oh, they don't have consciousness till 20 weeks. And they don't even know what they mean or where they got that. Be very kind about that. Don't be derisive. Don't be like, "Where's your source?" I could name 20 topics where if you asked me about it, I'd be like, "I don't know, I kinda heard this seems right." Like, that's not on that's fine.
yeah.
You want to help them think about it without making them feel bad, okay? Um, but in general, they'll have and this is very, appealing from a secular perspective, if you don't believe in souls or you're iffy on that whole thing or you're trying to think about, like, most secular people, for example, aren't vegetarians, right? Most secular people still have this kind of human supremacy view that Christians also have of humans are super, super important. We like them and care about them a lot in an instinctive way, right? And so then when they try to think about why, it's very common, not the only reason, but it's very common to think, well, our brains. We're
Mm,
super smart. We're smarter than everything else we've seen so far. There are some corner cases of like dolphins could do some cool stuff. Elephants, very interesting. Like there's corner cases, but generally speaking, it's not close. And that must be what's special about us. And so if you don't have that yet, do we care? Why or why not? And
mm,
then that coincides very nicely with like, look at this shrimp gummy bear embryo. Do we care? Right? That's a
mm,
normal reaction to have, even outside of motivated reasoning. And then you add in the motivated reasoning, it's a steep hill to climb, but
mm.
it's not very coherent because the reality is that human organisms develop on a continuum. Our
That's
neural development is a continuum. It begins extremely early in pregnancy. Neural tube is one of the first things, and it keeps going till we're like 25, you know? And so then it's like, okay, well, where in this dimmer switch situation have you gone from totally fine to kill for any reason to actually super important and we might arrest you for murder? Like, where is that? Because that's a big jump. And people feel it strongly. You can see this when you talk about later abortion, which by the way, later abortion conversations are totally related to personhood because you're trying to help the moderate pro-choice person think more deeply about where they're going to call it. And you can see this in occasionally publicized stories of women who abort in the 3rd trimester for non-medical reasons, sometimes outside of a medical setting, and you go online and you see 8,000 comments that are like, "I'm pro-choice, but that's a baby. I'm
mm,
pro-choice, but the normal way. This is murder." And you're like, "I would like to unpack that with you a little bit more because I get that as an instinctive reaction. That's fine. That's not a bodily rights argument, you know?
mm-mm,
That's
mm-mm.
something else."
That's
And
something else.
so you wanna help them start thinking about that. So when
Yeah.
you really hone in, most of them will circle around, 20 to 24 weeks, usually in my experience. They'll kind of pick a threshold in the early 2nd trimester, like
Mhm.
pre-viability, um, and then you kinda just gotta, "Well, why then?" Because the
Yeah.
reality is if you had, like, a graph of neural development and you didn't label the x-axis of time, and you
Mhm.
had different mile markers of things that were happening and asked people when to call it, they wouldn't be able to find 20 weeks.
No,
You
you're
wouldn't be
right.
able to find 20 weeks on there,
Well, it's such a
you
good
know?
point. The continuum piece of this is something that I have been trying to express for so long is in order to get to 24 weeks, you had to be 20 weeks, you had to be 14 weeks, you had to be just conceived. So it kind of gets into that too. It's like I think that continuum is a very important piece. Like, okay, why do you place it? Why do you place personhood at 24 weeks? Okay, but can we take that back a little bit? Can we take that back a little bit? Like,
Well, and also,
yeah.
this is from my perspective as a secular person, I think humans are amazing. I think that watching the brain come online is one of the best experiences I've ever had. By that, I mean motherhood.
Mhm.
And when your newborn is born, it's very obvious to anyone looking at this that they are not fully conscious and aware of what's going on around them. They don't even understand the difference between them and you originally. It doesn't matter. Their brain, their neural development is happening at such a rapid fire. You know, one of the things that's unique about humans as a species is that our neuronal growth rate continues to be extremely rapid post birth for quite
Mhm.
a while. There are other mammalian species where the neuron growth rate is one thing and then they're born and it's kind of chills out. They kind of
Very
got where they needed to be and there's still some stuff happening, but for humans, it's like it keeps going super fast. If you were just looking at neuronal growth rate and you asked someone to guess where birth was, they wouldn't be able to find it, okay?
yeah.
It's different for us, and so watching you've seen, where the first time your baby is like, "Wait, and it's, like, cute and funny, but I find it very moving because I know that brain in there is working, 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 working to figure it out, and the human brain is amazing, and I
I
agree in some sense with the people who are like, "This is the really important thing." I get what they're saying. The part where they lose me is at 20 weeks. I'm like, "Actually, I think the whole process is actually pretty remarkable the whole time." You're
yeah.
picking 20 weeks as an ad hoc thing, man, come on. There's
Yeah.
nothing happening at 20 weeks that at 19 weeks wasn't already happening. You gotta give me something more to go on. Now, I actually have more sympathy for the people who are like, it's not about their neural development, it's about when can they live outside the mom without her having to
Mm.
give so much. And I'm like, that actually in my mind makes more sense because there's an objective criteria there. I don't know if I agree with your, ethical premises about what adults owe babies and things like that, but I can engage what you're saying as something where you had some premises that meant a lot to you and you're applying them in real life, trying
Yeah.
to apply them objectively. But
Well, and I
the
think in
cognition
like
thing, it's just very ad hoc.
in some ways with the, a fetus can live or cannot live outside a woman's body, that is still changing though with technological advancements. And so
Yep.
it's like it's static for a minute until, we
Mhm.
get more technological advances and it's like, okay, well when Roe was when Roe was decided in 1973, what was it? 28 weeks or something? That or something like that. It was something and
Sure.
then
It's
now,
been moving back and back and back.
exactly,
And
interesting. Yeah.
what so here's a good thought experiment to help people who are pro-choice delineate where their priorities lie. I think for a lot of moderate pro-choice people who are focused on bodily rights, the
Mhm.
idea of artificial wombs starting much, much earlier, let's say that they could start as early as 8 weeks, just making it up. To them, that's, like, potentially a compromise
Mm.
because they're not against embryos and fetuses, they're against women having to go through all of this without continually
Mhm.
consenting to it. And so for them, artificial wombs is like I mean, it's sci-fi, but maybe. What's interesting is when you talk to some abortion advocates and to them, instead of artificial wombs being a potential solution to this conundrum, they're a threat. Because and I actually have links to multiple articles by different talking heads on the abortion rights side talking about how artificial wombs would be a threat to abortion rights because then people would argue that, the bodily rights thing is resolved and they're not accounting for the right to avoid genetic parenthood. And I'm like, "That's very different than the right to not have your body being used."
Interesting.
They'll basically say it's not just and some of them are very explicit. I always appreciate the really direct voices way more. So that you
Yeah.
have some that are like, "Well, there's a right to avoid genetic parenthood," and there's others like, "There's a right to a dead fetus." There's a right to a dead fetus, and they'll just say that.
Right.
I'm like, "Gross, but thank you though for just, like,
You're
saying what you're
I'm
talking about."
yeah, because I think we see so many times people that are just using euphemisms and they're just beating around the bush. It's
Mhm.
like, finally, just say what you mean so that we
Yeah.
can understand.
Well,
Um,
and also because when they speak that directly, in my mind, that means they really wrestled with their position and they're holding to this. The ones that freak out if you say baby or unborn child, or even some of them don't want you to say fetus if it technically at 9 weeks is an embryo, not a fetus. I'm like, okay, I feel like you're very frail. If fetal personhood didn't matter, you wouldn't care what I called it. You would just be like, "Sure, whatever, you can't do it." But instead, you're actually hypersensitive. Do you know why? Because even if you personally don't care, maybe you don't, everybody else does. That's why the heartbeat argument is so obnoxious. They'll say, it doesn't matter," but also it's fetal pole cardiac activity. I'm like, "If it doesn't matter, why are you arguing with me?"
yes.
Okay? It
Yes.
does matter. Tons of people care
Yes.
about this. Give me a
Yes.
break.
100%. Well, I think that's the thing. It either does matter, it doesn't matter. Um, you've given us, I mean, a lot of information, which I think is amazing. And I think pro-life people, if you are no matter actually how long you've been in the pro-life movement, you need to be understanding the arguments. You need to be understanding pro-life arguments. You need to have some tools in your tool belt, because you will come across someone who is pro-choice. You will have to defend your position. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about the abortion debate index on your website. Can you tell us a little bit
Yes.
about that and just how people can use it, in their daily life and the resources that you guys have available to just your average pro-lifer who thinks, killing babies is wrong.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. It
Yeah,
is at secularprolife.org/index. That's our abortion debate index. And kudos to Secular Pro-Life's followers because it was their idea, actually.
amazing.
We just had all this content on our blog and on our website of how we respond to all kinds of different things. And they came to us and said, "Can you organize this? I want to be able to find this all the time." And we said, "Wow, yeah, good point." And so the abortion debate index, it has a very long table of contents that's essentially all of these different pro-choice talking points, and when you click on one, it will take you to our content on how we respond to it. And if you're looking for ways, especially if you are the kind of pro-life person who has been either not talking about this at all, or when you do talk about it, it's been mostly in a religious context,
Mm,
this will help you if you wanna think about how to translate to a more secular context. A lot
mm,
of it is similar, a lot of it's different. I do wanna say too, you said, at some point you might come across a pro-choicer. I hope you do, man. You should be looking for them. Look, we want the whole country and eventually the whole world to see our vision on this, and that's not gonna happen unless we are looking for reasons to talk about it and then talking about it in persuasive ways. The
yes.
the the central most important thing is to think about who is your target audience? Do you understand their perspective? And can you talk to them calmly? And if you are working on those things, you're gonna become a better and better advocate. Try to get rid of your own defensiveness. I'm not saying I'm good at this. I'm just giving the advice.
No,
And
it's
try to think about yourself as an ambassador. This is something that all private citizen pro-lifers, and by that I mean people who don't formally work for a pro-life organization, but they care about this, get good and go talk.
And I
Yeah.
think it's important, know your audience, you guys. I mean, this is for my fellow Christians out there. Look, I know that we love talking about our faith. It's the primary thing in our lives, and that's 100% as it should be. If you're talking to someone, when I was in college, I would talk to tons of people on campus about abortion. Do you know how many of them were Christian? Not many of them. So if I start throwing out like Jesus and God, like they're not gonna hear anything, okay?
Yeah.
So I need to start speaking their language, and so I kinda like what you said, Monica, about the the abortion debate I can't talk, the abortion debate index on Secular Pro-Life's website because it's sort of a translation tool. Okay. As Christians, I love every single one of us, but we do need a little bit of a translation tool. Sometimes it's not enough. It's actually a lot of times it's not enough. If you're speaking to someone who is secular to throw out Bible verses, you formed me, in my mother's womb. Yes, we know that. We know that. And we know the value of that. But we have to speak in a way that's going to hold value for other people and make sense to them as well and kind of get them to understand. But I also understand that's difficult for some people. So I think that's a really great resource. And you guys can search by topic. You can say, well, how would I respond to this? Do it as you're
Mhm.
on social media. There's debates happening all around you. If you don't know
Mhm.
how to respond to someone, this is a really great resource. And it's a great resource as well to get some other deeper information. about the abortion issue. So I would really
Mhm.
encourage. Can you say that website one more time for
Yes, secularprolife.org/index. And I wanted to point out too,
Yeah.
what we didn't expect with Secular Pro-Life, because 'cause we've been making our content primarily in mind to talk to moderate pro-choice people and to draw in the non-traditional pro-lifers we were talking about earlier. But we've gotten a ton of resonance with what we would call traditional pro-lifers, Christian conservative pro-lifers, because there's a whole subsection of y'all that kind of privately also felt like it was just a religious thing and felt very deeply and passionately about it, but also muted. And and then they found our we've had people tell us this. They found our website, found all these ways to explain things, found all these citations, and felt like, "You know what? I can talk about this in a
Mhm.
way that will be hopefully productive." So, it is for everyone.
Good.
And I also wanted to say really quick too, knowing your audience means that sometimes your audience is religious people, and sometimes religious arguments are not just acceptable, but highly helpful and appropriate. When people come to me and tell me, well, this is what the Bible, pro-choicers tell me, the Bible actually doesn't say this, that, or the other thing. Mostly I say, I don't actually care what the Bible says, but I'm not equipped to debate them scripture for scripture at all. That's you guys. You guys gotta do that, And so there's we're not anti-religious. We're not saying don't ever bring up religion. We're saying have multiple tools in your toolbox and
Yeah.
figure out who you're talking to
Yeah.
decide how you're gonna do it.
Yes,
Yeah.
pick the right tool for the right job, you guys.
Mhm.
This is something I've been wanting to talk about, and I know a lot of pro-lifers have been interested in this as well. Kind of going back a couple of years, or I don't know when the Turnaway Study came out, but you've done a lot of analysis of the Turnaway Study. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about that, some of the most overlooked or underdiscussed findings in it, and kind of just your overall opinion of it. It was a very um what's the word? It was explosive in some ways when it came out. It was
Influential for sure.
influential. Yeah, that's a great word. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked. I love talking about the Turnaway
And tell us
Study.
what the Turnaway Study is for anyone who
Yes.
doesn't know. Okay.
The Turnaway Study was when researchers went to abortion clinics and they spoke to a bunch of women that had shown up at those clinics to get abortions, and some group of them got abortions and some group of them were turned away. The clinic turned them away, usually because they were just past the gestational limit for the clinic. And so they had these 2 groups of women. They all had wanted abortions. Some got them, some couldn't get them. And then they followed them for about 5 years and assessed their outcomes. Okay? Uh, the Turnaway Study is known for its findings that the women who got abortions overwhelmingly said it was the right decision for them and displayed very little emergent negative emotions or things. The Turnaway Study was sort of designed and born of the desire to question the pro-life movement, saying women are traumatized by their abortions, women regret their abortions, we need
Mhm.
informed consent laws, we need all these things. And these researchers were like, is that even, has anyone measured this? Is that really true? And that was what they were looking to find out. Now I'm going to pause for a second and say 2 things. First, there's some significant critique of their methodology, mostly in the idea that the kinds of women who would agree to continue talking about their experience for years might be biased towards the kinds of women who aren't very traumatized by their abortion. And
Mhm.
maybe the women who were really upset about this whole thing don't want to keep talking about it for years and didn't opt into the study. That's possible. I do want to say that's not the researchers' fault. And there's only so many things you can do to design a study to measure things as closely as you want. My personal opinion after reading the whole book on it and reading a lot of their stuff is I do believe they are very biased to defend abortion rights, but I also believe they were trying to design a study that would really measure things. I
Mm.
believe that they were. So I just wanted to note that. Um, the second thing is that the findings about the women who got abortions and overwhelmingly said that they didn't regret it or that it was the right decision for them or whatever got tons of media coverage. And I remember when it was first, it's been several years now, but I remember when it was first getting a lot of coverage and I was reading one of the articles about it. And I was thinking to myself, man, it would have been interesting if they had also asked the women who couldn't get abortions how they ended up feeling about it, like just to compare. It's
That's
too
what
bad.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
thought to myself, it's too bad they didn't ask them that. And then
Mhm.
I found out later, they did.
I see.
And
I didn't know that.
yeah, I didn't either because so I read a Vanity Fair article at some point talking about the Turnaway Study, talking about the women who don't regret da 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 da. It's one of many articles I'd already read. It's all kind of the same narrative. And buried somewhere in the, I don't know, 27th paragraph, I'm making it up, I don't remember. Buried somewhere in the article, the author of the Vanity Fair article mentioned technically it's true that the women who couldn't get abortions said they didn't regret it either. But of course they would say that because now they got a 4-year-old in front of them. And I was like, whoa, pause.
They're like, time out.
Where did it say that? Because I looked for it. I looked for it in their different publications. They call it the Turnaway Study as a singular study, but there's dozens of different peer-reviewed publications about different aspects of the data because it was a ton of data. So I looked for a paper like that and could not find one. And then I read this Vanity Fair article and I went and looked again and I still couldn't find one. And there's no way this pro-abortion author would have mentioned that as speculation. It seems like she mentioned it begrudgingly. And so I reached out to Secular Pro has some fabulous volunteers, including some people who are pretty good at research and fact finding. And I was like, this is actually driving me crazy. And I reached out to one of my favorites and said, can you find what is she talking about? And so
Find this.
find this. And she did. And it turned out at the time that this happened, it was not available online. It was in the book. So I physically bought the book and read the whole thing. It is now. Since then, they have published that paper. It just hadn't been published yet. But it turns out they did ask the women who couldn't get abortions how they felt. And they found that, follow me here, of all the women who couldn't get abortions, some subset went and did get abortions somewhere else or had miscarriages. It was about 25% of them. Okay. So
Yep.
now you've got 75% left. Of that group, 10% placed for adoption. So you have 90% left. But of the women who couldn't get abortions, who gave birth to a child, and who raised that child themselves, 98% of them said they no longer wish they'd aborted, and they cited their bonding to their children and subsequent life experiences as a reason for their retroactive positive evaluation of being denied an abortion. If you read the actual quotes in the paper, they'll say things like, I can't believe I ever considered it. My son is like the best thing in my life, And the researchers who are pro-abortion for sure, I don't even just mean pro-choice, I mean they're pro-abortion. They published all this stuff because it was in their findings. Like they did publish it, you know? Um, and they're kind of funny because they would write things like, "This surprised me, and I will admit that I didn't see it coming," which is very honest, and part of me is like, "It didn't surprise me," but
Yeah,
okay.
no, it's not surprising.
Right,
Yeah,
but it's okay, like, they're publishing it, but it
sure.
didn't get any media coverage. It's got a total dearth of media coverage, and the organization that put on this study and has a website about it and stuff, they definitely, like, underplay it. I have brought this finding up for years, and I have had some of our pro-choice detractors online come to me and say that I'm a liar or I'm too stupid to understand the study, and that if you look at their website summarizing it, they never mention that, and if you look at their fact sheet about effects of abortion, they never mention that, and they're right. They don't mention it. But I'm not a liar. It was
It
in the
doesn't it
study, okay?
doesn't exist.
You're saying
Right.
more than you think. And so
Yeah.
so the big thing was they found that and I wanna emphasize, these aren't women who were Googling abortion options. There's literally studies that look at Google searches and assess different things. There's different levels to the certainty of your decision. There's probably so many women who find out they're pregnant and for at least half a second think, no. Like the amount that you're gonna consider abortion is gonna vary. These are women who physically showed up at clinics to get an abortion that day,
Yeah.
okay? And basically everyone adoption's a special case, and I could do a whole other episode on that, but basically everyone who kept their baby and raised their baby was
Mhm.
glad they didn't get an abortion, and, nobody talks about this. And so and then they'll say, like, the Vanity Fair author would say something like, "Of course they're gonna say that now because they have this 4.5-year-old in front of them that they've bonded to, blah, 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 blah." But if you read the actual study, almost all the change in emotion happened by the time of the birth.
Mm.
And actually, one of the statistics I thought was even more intriguing was 1 week after being denied an abortion. So 1 week, so they're still pregnant. Whatever
Yeah.
was going on in their life to make them think they needed to go to an abortion clinic is probably still going on in their life.
Yeah.
1 week after being denied an abortion, immediately over a third of them said, "I no longer wish I gotten an abortion." And you're just like, this
Wow.
is a shocking amount of measured ambivalence, coming from an unlikely source. The Turnaway Study is known for, like, abortion rights advocates cite it all the time to talk about how abortion doesn't harm women, and then they will talk about how, the study didn't just measure emotions, it measured lots of things, and one of the other findings that gets brought up a lot, especially post-Dobbs, is
Mhm.
that the women who couldn't get abortions had worse financial outcomes initially, and measurably, statistically significantly worse financial outcomes. What it doesn't mention is by the end of the study period, which is about 5 years long, most of those resolved. And by that, I mean, if you look at the women who got abortions and the
Mhm.
women who couldn't, by the end of the study period, their full-time employment rates, their household income, all these things were about the same.
That's very significant, you guys,
Mhm.
because that's so significant because we're pushed and peddled this narrative that kids are gonna ruin your life forever,
Mhm.
that you will never financially recover.
Mhm.
In my parents' case, maybe, I don't know, but but that's just not the case, and I think this is important information because it is taking okay, it's taking 5 years, like you said, I think it was, like, yeah, 5 years.
Mhm.
And there's really no significant difference between the financial, state of women who had the abortions and who didn't, and I think that
Mhm.
that very, very substantial information, because it totally breaks down this narrative that, women who have abortions are gonna go on and they're gonna have more money, more success, more fame, whatever it is, and that's just
They
a
had
lie.
the same life satisfaction. They asked them to rate their life satisfaction. By the end of the study, there was no difference between the women who got abortions and the women who
Wow.
couldn't in life satisfaction. But I wanna say plugging specifically related to let them live.
Yeah, please.
One of the ways one of the ways that they did continue to have statistically significant financial differences all the way through the end of the study was that the women who couldn't get abortions and had their babies were much more likely to still be on WIC, as an
Mhm.
example. And I actually think this is instructive to the pro-life movement because, first of all, I'm all for it. That's what those programs are for.
I
These
agree
people
with
in these
you.
unexpected situations to help make up for some of this disruption in their life.
I agree.
Um, I think that it's also worth noting that even where there were financial differences, when you ask a woman 5 years later what they think about not getting an abortion, they are aware of their financial situation, and they are aware of their employment levels and who they're living with and all these things when they tell you how they feel. And if the idea is and this cuts both ways because when pro-lifers hear the Turnaway Study and all the women who got abortions said it was the right decision for them, pro-lifers will go through all the reasons why maybe that's cope and maybe that's selection bias, maybe the thing. But what's amazing is to watch them when you talk about the women who couldn't get abortions,
Mhm.
also saying it, then the pro-choicers do it. All the reasons why maybe they're not telling the truth or maybe da 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 da. Look, pick a standard, all right? Either we're trusting women and what they're saying in this study or we're not. But it's gonna be hard for you to convince me that just one group or the other, you know? And I feel like it speaks to how a lot of times abortion is reacting to a genuinely difficult but temporary situation. And if instead, like your group does, you can come alongside people and say, what do you need right now to make this doable? What the research finds is that it gets better financially and logistically, and they're glad for it. And I'll bring this up, and pro choicers will say, oh, so I guess as long as their, trauma is temporary, or as long as they're not physically destroyed, but emotionally they recover. Like it's very biased the way they phrase it. Like that's a good reason to ban something. No, no, no. We should ban it because it kills human beings. That's
Yeah.
why we should ban it. But let's say we could never ban it anywhere. Let's say that it was going to be fully legal everywhere forever and ever. Okay. If you think that means that I would just stop talking, it doesn't. And I would think, as a pro choice person, when you want women to have information, autonomy, and make an informed decision, if a woman is trying to decide if she wants to get an abortion, the Turnaway Study tells you that realistically, if you got an abortion, you probably would be fine in 5 years, and realistically, if you didn't, you probably would also be fine. And if you are trying to decide based on the Turnaway Study, it is not fair to only tell them about how the Turnaway Study found that women didn't regret their abortions and they didn't have lasting emotional harm and da 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 da, and then leave out the part where the Turnaway Study also found that the women who didn't get abortions ended up really loving their kids and glad they didn't get an abortion. Like, do whatever you want, but tell them the whole information. Are you kidding?
Love it. I think informed consent is a very, very, very important piece of the puzzle that is missing a lot of times. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, we help so many women and they have no idea. They have no idea what they're about to get themselves into with an abortion. They have no clue. They don't
Yeah.
know all like they're not given this information that okay, it's going to be okay. And I can tell you it's going to be okay. I was just in Texas and I finally got to meet a mom that I counseled like almost 7 years ago and her son is 6. They're
Yeah.
doing fine. They're doing
Yeah.
great. They really are, and she has no regrets. I mean, obviously, that's not a Turnaway Study, that's just one case, but I have seen it. I have seen that, and there's obviously so many factors, like you said, you guys, like, there's some women who won't be fine in 5 years, but maybe that's personal decisions. There's so many different layers to this, and it's impossible to boil it down to just one reason why women would be okay or not, but I do
Yeah.
think it's an important trend, and like you said, I think at the end of the day, we know what abortion does, we know that it takes the life of a human being, and so that really shouldn't be on the table, and so if women are really considering abortion, not abortion, your life is gonna be just fine with a kid, and you're gonna have help
Yep.
to do it. You're
Well,
gonna have
and
help to it.
The pro-choice side gets angry at us because they think we are misleading women when we talk about abortion regret or abortion trauma or all these things or how it's gonna be so bad for you if you get an abortion. We can keep debating that, whatever, but then they unironically don't even notice that they go on about how there's so many reasons why having a kid would totally disrupt your life,
Yeah.
and then you see I mean, Twitter is the worst example of everything, but you see these like I just saw a week ago a super viral tweet, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of likes saying something like, "You say, abortion is wrong, but I think lifelong trauma from forced pregnancy is wrong." I'm like, "That's not real.
It's not
That's
real, and
not a
that's a
real thing."
very common response. I would like to repeat this, I'm sure I've said it on this podcast before, but I had asked one of our moms because we had kept getting comments on different posts like, "Oh, well, are you gonna take care of this kid for the next 18 years because, she's traumatized, she's not gonna be able to financially provide for this child for 18 years," and I said, "Diamond, how does this type of comment make you feel?" And she said, "That really offends me that people assume that I'm not gonna be a good mom, that I'm not gonna be able to persevere through tough situations in order to provide my child with a life, like, that
Yeah,
is
and
good." And I
also
was like,
women considering abortion, seriously considering abortion, and in this case, they even went to clinics and then not doing it, that doesn't mean they'll be a bad mom.
"Nope,
That means that they live in the reality of the United States where this is a legal and pushed option, and they were in a difficult situation and they considered it. And the reality is that the overwhelming majority of them, they bond to their children normally and they're more likely, by the way, to bond normally and to do well if they have any social support, not even just financial support, just like any
social."
social support. And I feel like for anyone who has been the parent of a young child, but especially if you've been far away from family or if you've been really broke or both or other things, you're like, yeah, no kidding. You
So
didn't need a study to do this, guys. You
no,
could
no,
have
no,
just
it's a
looked
yeah,
around.
it's a no-brainer. I love that. Well, while we're on the topic of studies, are there any recent studies, or other data that's come out in the last year or so, or that you're expecting to come out in 2026 that you think we should be paying attention to right now?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. Okay, at the risk of ending on a cliffhanger, I was reading a study last week that was about satisfaction for birth mothers with adoption.
Mm.
And this is related to the Turnaway Study because it kind of reminded me a little bit of the structure of the Turnaway Study. It wasn't the same researchers, it wasn't the same group or anything like that, okay? In the Turnaway Study, as we just talked about, the group that got abortions and the group that couldn't get abortions, they basically all at the end said that they were satisfied with whatever happened, and I don't think I mentioned this, but their satisfaction kinda went up over time and then plateaued. Went up even faster for the people who couldn't get abortions, but everybody was doing better the longer out it was. It's basically a study in hindsight bias, like, in the end, everyone felt like what happened to them was meant to be or whatever.
Mm.
With that as the backdrop, I was reading this study about women who placed for adoption, and that's not what they found. First of all, they found that on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being good, they gave an average of 3 out of 5 for being satisfied with their decision. So it was
Mhm.
much more mid.
Mm.
But more notable than that, they found that their satisfaction decreased over time. And it decreased more for the women who ended up having higher education and higher income. I
Mhm.
speculate that they looked back and thought, I could have done it. And I think
Mm.
there is a parallel here where women have a disruptive pregnancy for whatever reason, and one side is telling them, we can take care of your problem for you by aborting. And I want to make sure the other side is not saying, we can take care of your problem for you by removing the baby. I'm not saying adoption's always a bad idea. I think sometimes it's a good idea. Sometimes it's a vitally necessary idea. And I feel like it's important to caveat that. And it's obviously not the same as abortion in blindingly clear ways to any pro life person. That's not my point. My point is, from what I can see from the research we looked at, the moms do better when we come alongside them and say, what do you need to parent safely and long term if that's what you want to do?
Yep,
And we can help you do that because in both cases, you might be reacting to an acutely bad but temporary situation.
yep,
And in both cases, abortion and adoption are permanent.
yep.
So I
I
just think,
wholeheartedly agree
yeah,
with you on that, and I don't know if I've talked about this a lot. I mean, we have a little bit with Let Them Live because obviously we do come alongside women and walk with them, and they become some of the best moms. Um, out of over 1,000, I mean, over 1,200 women that we've helped to cancel their abortions and choose life, only one has successfully, done an adoption and has chosen
Yeah.
that path. So I do think, I think there's a lot of really well-intentioned pro-lifers, and like you said, adoption is not a bad thing. My sister-in-law is adopted. Obviously, I think adoption is absolutely beautiful. I would love to adopt someday. But when it is presented as this dichotomy, like abortion or adoption, and they're like, I don't want either. We as pro-lifers do have an obligation to say, "Oh, there's another option here. You can be a
And
mom."
in particular, I don't want us accidentally reinforcing these narratives of like, yeah, actually, you can't handle this pregnancy. And what
Yes.
would this do to your community? And what would this do to your boyfriend? And what would this do to like,
Yes.
and how are you going to da 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 da? Like, it's all kind of the same things. And I've heard
Listen, yeah.
too many birth moms tell me about how I want to be careful because I'm speaking of other people's stories. And so I'm
Yeah.
going to try to be kind of vague. But I've recurrently seen the pattern of woman gets pregnant in an unexpected situation. Her community sheeps. Her community heaps shame upon her.
Yeah.
And then they tell her that if she really loves this kid, she'll place with someone who can take care of them better than her. And sometimes that is true. I'm not saying it's never true. I'm just saying we're coming at this kind of sideways. I feel like lots of different kinds of people can be perfectly good parents if
Yes.
their community is coming alongside and
Yeah.
supporting them.
Yes.
And I don't want us to be on the same side as the people who are like, you better have all of college tuition saved up and a single bedroom for every single child and da 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 da. Otherwise, why are you thinking about having what do you
Yeah.
stop? All right.
I think that's a great I was just talking to our team about this because, our social media team will post up, fundraising for moms and saying, "Hey, we're gonna help her with this. She really just doesn't wanna have this abortion. We wanna help her." And they'll just comment adoption, adoption. And there's not a lot of things that really grind my gears. That is one of them.
It's
Um,
so glib.
and it's
Yes.
just completely unhelpful.
Mm,
Now, if a mom says, "Hey, counselor, I would like to consider adoption." Of
yeah.
course, we have resources, and that those resources, a lot of adoption places that we've worked with are very much advocates for the birth mom, saying, "Look,
Yeah.
you do not ever have to do this. If you change, you can change your mind. You give birth to your baby, you see your child, you can change your mind."
Yeah.
And that's really, and again, we've presented that option to so many moms because they have genuinely considered it. But after thinking about everything, they've decided, I want to be a mom. This is my child.
Yeah.
And there is something biological there. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, so as pro lifers, I think, I mean, this is totally a tangent, but I love that we're on this because we have to do more than just say, oh, I'll take your baby. That's just
Yeah,
not the thing.
and it's evidence-based too because the
Yes.
research shows that when birth moms feel like this was not a coerced situation and feel like they were supported through the decision-making process, they're more likely to express satisfaction over time. That research I was just talking about is a
Yep.
huge deal. Also, importantly, when they are allowed to have continued connection to the child, way more likely to express continued satisfaction with the situation. Although to me, that's a mixed result because I this is not the research, this is just me talking. I read that as, yeah, and how much happier would they even be if they just were with the child all the time? Like,
Right.
the options are never speak to them again, get to talk to them once a month for a couple years, get to see them occasionally, and then what was the rest of that spectrum? You know?
Right.
You're telling me it got better and better? Uh,
Kind of think it might.
well, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it is important for us to be evidence-based about this.
Yeah.
There's there's always there's always going to be people who are authentically fully informed consent, and they're like, "I would like to look into adoption, and that should be an option." And even then, you wanna do it in a way that's most likely to minimize the difficulty and increase satisfaction, minimize trauma as you do
Totally.
it. But I do think we shouldn't be glib about it. I mean, speaking as a mother who had children 3 of my 4 children we had when we were quite pretty broke and we were on government assistance and so on. Um, I hear a lot of these arguments about adoption, broader than just she was considering an abortion and also including, like, how will she afford this, that, and the other thing, and I'm like, "What does that mean? Which of my kids Do you think I should give to a richer couple? You better be hold on, you know? I know I'm being a little defensive. I
No,
understand. I
it's
just
and
want it to be something we keep in mind, okay?
I
Because
think it's
I
important.
think parenting is wonderful and children are foundationally a human good. That's like half the point of the pro-life movement. We're talking about these incredibly wonderful, amazing lives. And I think consistency would be facilitating family connection where possible,
I think
you
that's
know?
cool. Yeah, and again, just for anyone who might be angry, watching this, just
Sorry. Very yelly.
I say this because I just want to repeat myself. I'm not against adoption. I
No.
think it is a beautiful redemptive thing. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen in many different circumstances. It's just that maybe that doesn't always have to be. I think it should be woman. It should be birth mother driven. So if she
Yes.
has the interest and she's finding out the information about it, it shouldn't necessarily be the pro life movement's one stop all encompassing solution to
And it
abortion.
should never be glib. So all those comments you're seeing, they're like adoption. Those are important because they are part of a larger mentality that I think is I don't think it's
Yeah.
malicious. I think it's just can
No.
we think about this for a little bit longer
Yeah. No
because,
yes,
you
let's
know,
think about it a little bit more, for sure. I
yeah.
100% agree.
Yep.
Let's keep going with the resources, we're almost done here. What is one book or resource besides Secular Pro-Life, website that every pro-lifer should have on their shelf, on their
Oh
bookshelf?
gosh, that's such a good one.
You can only pick one.
Honestly, I thought you should read the Turnaway Study. I thought it was very instructive. It's very written from a pro-abortion perspective, so be ready for that. But if you want to understand the target audience, it's very helpful. Another one that's pretty good. Oh, this is related to abortion and it's also broader, but I've been reading The Dignity of Dependence by Leah Sargent.
Mm,
And
okay.
it's really good, and she basically is saying, especially in America, the ideal of autonomy is wildly exaggerated. We are all dependent on each other at some point. Babies are dependent on their mothers, and she talks about abortion. Um, and pregnant women are dependent on their society, and at different points, everybody gets sick and some people get disabled, and, like, we need to stop acting like
Mm,
dependence is a deviation from the norm that needs to be hurried up and hidden and recognize it's a human condition that we can respond to in a more humane way. And it has a lot about abortion in it. And then it also talks about other issues that she draws in connection to it. I think it's very thought provoking, but for messaging, it's helpful because I think it includes a lot of common ground that you can use to talk about these issues with people who aren't already pro life and just draw from lots of different topics.
I
Yeah.
love that. No, I think that's amazing. And we talked about all of the arguments. What would you say if someone told you that she was pregnant and considering abortion? What would you say to
Mm.
her?
First, I would ask her why, and I would want to hear all of her thought process. And I mean, it depends on what her answers are, but generally speaking, as she's expressing fear and trepidation and concern about the significance of pregnancy and especially newborn and baby rearing, I would affirm that because I agree that it's a big deal. And then I would talk to her about what she would need to make this look differently. And I would ask her, we've thought a lot about the next 6 to 9 months. We've thought a lot about the next 2 years. What does 5 years look like to you? What does 10
Mhm.
years look like to you? And I would try to get her to think longer term. Humans in general, not just pregnant women, are bad at anticipating how we will handle change. And if we can, like, chill out a little bit and try to think longer term and realize how it kinda evens out over time, sometimes that helps. And then I would try to connect her to what she needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. I think that's amazing. I think it's really important to I always ask people that question because everyone always has a different answer.
Fine.
But it's very important because at some point or another, we are all going to come across a woman who is considering abortion. I fully
Mhm.
believe that in this digital age. So
Oh, yeah.
thank you for that answer. And
Better
I
if
just
it's someone you
yeah,
know, though. Like,
yes,
um,
yes,
I do think it's good to have, in a very light touch way, ask her about I think it's important to be Socratic. Ask her a lot of questions, don't tell her stuff. I had this happen literally once not long ago. It was an odd situation because I actually didn't know the woman. We just had mutual connections, and we had some things in common, same age, similar educational background, things like that. And our mutual connections noticed that, and they said, "Hey, this woman is unhappy that she's pregnant." She was married. Um, Her husband really wanted to keep the baby. She was really not so sure. And they said, "Will you talk to her?" And I was like, "I will talk to her if she wants to talk to me." Is
Mhm.
does she know you're asking me this? And so we had a phone call. It was really good, and we talked a lot about a lot of our similarities, and it was similar to what I just described to you, that structure. Um, but in particular, at one point, I did say I was going really light touch. I wasn't trying to talk about, that's a baby and fetal development and this,
Sure.
I just want to know where you're coming from. But at one point, I said, you've mentioned multiple times that your husband, clearly, you guys aren't aligned on this. Do you think he views this embryo as like gonna be a child soon or a child right now? And she was like, "Oh, he views this as a child right now. As far as he's concerned, this is part of our family, da 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 da." I was like, "Okay, that seems like an important factor. What do you think?" And it was the only time I head on addressed it because I tried, and we talked for like an hour. Um, and she said, you know, um, "We're Christians, so I would fall on the side of, yeah, that's what I would think too." And I was like, "Okay, that seems like an important factor." And then I just dropped it. I didn't say anything else about it. I just wanted to raise the issue. I
Mhm.
don't know how much that played a part or not, but my point is that you can touch on it. I wouldn't make it the whole thing, you
Right,
know?
right. Sometimes it like you said, I think asking questions is important. Positioning yourself in a way so that she can share with you and you can try to get an understanding of where she's at. So I
Mhm. You would
100%
know, I guess.
I
So,
100% agree with you. No, I think it's
yeah,
amazing. So thank you for sharing all of that and sharing all your information. Where can people follow you and watch, all this
sure.
stuff you
We're
and
on all the social media channels. It's usually secular pro life, one word. Tragically, on TikTok, it's not. It's like secular_pro_life, which annoys me so much, but that's what it is. Um, and if you really want to keep close tabs with us, you should get on our email newsletter because that's where we first put events we're doing or projects we have. Sometimes that we only send things through the email if it's for like a specific location. So you can do that by going to our website, secularprolife.org/contact. Or I think anytime you go to our website, like a pop-up asks you to get on our email. So you can very easily get on our email if you wanted to.
awesome. Good job. Okay, guys, do that, please. I'm actually on your email list and I love reading them. So,
Thank you.
thank you again so much for sharing with all of us, all of your wealth of knowledge.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
Of course.
Thank you for tuning in to the Let Them Live podcast with Emily Burning. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know your thoughts in the comments and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.